He walked in like a nobody, old, trembling, and broke. The manager humiliated him in front of everyone, but what no one knew, he was a billionaire. And he was about to turn one waitress's life upside down. This isn't just a story about kindness. It's about justice, legacy, and a truth buried for nearly a century. Stay with us, because what starts with a $5 cup of coffee ends with a reckoning that shakes an entire corporation. Another beggar trying to pass as a customer. Christopher's voice cut through the busy cafe like a blade. I've said it before, this isn't a shelter. No money, no service. Curious eyes began to drift toward the elderly man with silver hair, his threadbare coat hanging off his frame, hands trembling slightly as he fumbled through the worn-out pockets. I swear I brought my wallet, he mumbled, voice shaking from shame. I just wanted a cup of coffee, to warm up before heading out again. And I only serve paying customers. Christopher shot back coldly, gesturing toward the door. We have a clear policy, no service for vagrants. You're making our real customers uncomfortable. Jessica Johnson, 28, watched the entire scene unfold as she wiped down a nearby table. 6 months at this job had taught her when to speak up and when to stay quiet. But something about this moment stirred an ache she had buried long ago. A memory of the day her grandmother, lost in dementia, was thrown out of a store like an intruder. An uneasy silence blanketed the room as Christopher continued his public shaming. You might want to check out the shelter on 3rd Avenue, he said flatly. They serve soup to people like you. A chuckle rang out from a nearby table where 3 suited men watched like it was free entertainment. Old folks think the world still owes them, one of them said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Jessica took a deep breath, adjusted her apron, and stepped forward to the counter. Her eyes briefly met the old man's. In his eyes, she saw not just shame, but a dignity that hadn't yet been broken. I'll pay for his coffee, she said, placing a $5 bill on the counter. That was half her tips for the day, the money she'd need to get through the week by bus. Christopher turned to her, fury tightening his jaw. Jessica, stay out of this. This isn't your business. It's a matter of basic decency, she replied calmly but firmly. And if anyone here should feel ashamed, it's not him. Christopher snatched the bill. Your coffee, sir, he said with a sneer. Courtesy of an employee who thinks she gets to overrule management. The old man looked at Jessica with genuine gratitude. His posture straightened a little as she led him to an empty seat. Thank you, miss, he whispered. I didn't expect to find kindness today. Jessica smiled gently. My grandmother used to say kindness isn't something you wait for, it's something you practice every day. The next morning, Jessica was summoned to the manager's office before her shift even started. Christopher sat waiting, wearing that same fake concern expression she'd seen before, the one he wore every time he was about to fire someone. Jessica, he said, lacing his fingers, you do understand this is a business, not a charity, right? He didn't need an answer. Your behavior yesterday was inappropriate, defiant even. Worse, you embarrassed both the staff and management in front of customers. I paid out of my own pocket, Jessica protested. That's not the point. His calm facade cracked for a brief moment. The issue is control. You made us look heartless while you played the role of the noble heroine. That's unacceptable. When Christopher placed the warning notice on the desk, Jessica felt true fear for the first time. This was her 3rd job in 18 months, and the only one that paid enough to cover rent and her mother's medication. Sign it, Christopher ordered. And remember, you're still on probation. 1 more incident, and you're out. As Jessica signed the paper with a slightly trembling hand, she noticed something strange. Christopher's demeanor was off. There was a tension in him, something uneasy. His eyes kept flicking toward the security camera in the corner, something he'd never paid attention to before. After her shift ended, drained and disheartened, Jessica collected her things from the locker room. Buried among her personal items, she found a plain white envelope. No name. Inside, a crisp $100 bill and a small, simple card. Thank you for your kindness. The world needs more people like you. Holding the card, Jessica felt a strange sensation run down her spine, like she was being watched. She looked around. The locker room was empty. Still, somehow she knew This wasn't just a thank you. This was the beginning of something bigger. That evening, as she cooked dinner for her ailing mother in their cramped apartment, Jessica couldn't stop thinking about the old man from the day before or the strange card. It wasn't the money that puzzled her most, but his eyes. They hadn't just held gratitude. They held something deeper, like he'd found something he'd been searching for a long time. In the days that followed, Christopher turned the warning into a personal crusade. He watched Jessica like a hawk waiting for her to stumble. Still waiting. "You're 8 minutes late," he murmured behind her as she struggled to balance a heavy tray of food. "And you forgot to clean the condiment station. Again." Now her coworkers avoided her, like Christopher's wrath might be contagious. Only Zoe, a new hire, remained unaffected. "What you did was amazing," Zoe confessed in the break room during their short recess. "Everyone's been talking about it. They just don't have the guts to say it to your face." Talking about what Jessica asked. "Christopher. He's got a nickname, the Terminator. This isn't the first time." Zoe pulled out her phone, scrolling through local community group post stories of similar experiences at the cafe. One recent post read, "Sorry we're not rich enough to drink coffee at your place." "Why hasn't anyone reported him?" Jessica asked, voice tight. "The owner's never around." And Zoe lowered her voice. "Christopher's related to the owner. Plus he controls the schedule and the tip pool. Complainers get the worst shifts or pushed out altogether." Just then, a sharply dressed man in a flawless suit entered the cafe. Jessica noticed him not because of his clothes, but because of his eyes. The exact same eyes as the old man from before. Only now, they belonged to a different face. Clean-shaven, hair neatly trimmed, posture straight as a ruler. Christopher, spotting what looked like a wealthy customer, immediately rushed over, beaming with a smile no one had ever seen before. "Good evening, sir. May I introduce our special imported coffee? It's not on the menu, reserved only for special guests." The man gave a polite smile. "Thank you. May I ask?" "The waitress who helped an elderly man a few days ago, is she working today?" Christopher's smile froze instantly. "I'm sorry, I'm not sure who you're referring to. I can serve you personally if you'd like." "I'd like to be served by her," the man said firmly, leaving no room for negotiation. Reluctantly, Christopher gave a stiff nod and gestured for Jessica. "He specifically asked for you." The man extended his hand. "A pleasure to formally meet you, Jessica. I'm Edward Thornton." That name hit Jessica like a bolt of lightning. Edward Thornton, philanthropic billionaire occasionally seen in the news for donating millions to charity. It was him, the man she had defended when he disguised himself as a poor homeless elder. "I'd like to invite you out for coffee and a conversation," he said, handing her a gold-trimmed card. "Not a job interview. Something far more meaningful than that." That night, while cooking dinner for her sick mother in their tiny apartment, Jessica couldn't stop thinking about the old man and the mysterious card. It wasn't the $100 bill that lingered in her mind. It was his gaze, one filled not only with gratitude, but something deeper. As if someone had finally found what they'd been searching for their entire life. The next day, an official letter arrived at Jessica's apartment. Inside, a lunch invitation at the Alexander Hotel, accompanied by a set of old photographs of the cafe where she worked. One of them showed the establishment back in the 1920s, with a sign above the door, "Johnson's Coffee Shop." Below the photo, a handwritten note. "Your grandmother was right about kindness. And maybe it's time you knew this place has a history someone's been trying to keep buried." Jessica held the photo in trembling hands. Johnson, her family name. Was it just coincidence, or was it a hidden thread? At the end of her shift that evening, Jessica found a USB drive in her locker. On the outside, it read, "Watch before tomorrow's lunch." Back home, she plugged it into her laptop and opened 3 files, historical documentation proving the cafe had been owned by the Johnson family since the 1930s. Recent photos capturing incidents of discriminatory practices at her current workplace. A partnership contract dated 1932 showing the cafe was never sold but fraudulently taken when her great-grandfather Thomas Johnson fell gravely ill. Jessica sat motionless, unable to speak. The very place where she had once been treated like an outsider was a legacy built by her ancestors, a heritage stolen by a system of prejudice, and now nearly a century later, ready to be brought into the light. Her phone buzzed. A text from Zoe. Zoe text. Christopher is in a panic. Corporate is sending investigators. There are serious allegations of discrimination. What did you do? Jessica typed back her fingers, steady, her heart even steadier. This wasn't impulsive anger anymore. It was something deeper. Something ancient and burning, like the blood of her ancestors awakening within her. A young woman, about to reclaim what had been stolen from her family. Lit only by the glow of her laptop screen, Jessica Johnson was no longer the fearful waitress. She was a woman standing on the edge of justice. Jessica V.O. When justice is delayed for nearly a century, its arrival needs to be flawless. The Alexander Hotel, an icon of classic elegance. Marble columns and crystal chandeliers that had witnessed decades of power plays and whispered deals. Jessica, in the only formal dress she owned, walked across the lobby, feeling eyes on her, doubting her, measuring her. But she kept walking, back straight, heart unshaken. Edward Thornton waited in a private room standing by the window. He wasn't alone. Beside him stood a composed, middle-aged woman with neatly tied gray hair and a younger man in sleek, black-rimmed glasses. They both rose when Jessica entered. Edward Jessica Johnson. Meet Margaret Chun, my corporate attorney, and James Washington, expert in property law and restorative justice. Margaret got right to the point. Margaret. We've reviewed the documents. The 1932 transfer was clearly fraudulent. Your great-grandfather Thomas Johnson never sold that café. It was seized through deception while he was hospitalized. James nodded, adjusting his glasses. James. It's not uncommon. During the Great Depression, many black-owned properties were stolen like this. The legal system was designed not to revisit these cases. A slideshow began on the screen behind them, old photographs of the original cafe property deeds, personal letters. A detailed timeline showing how the Reed family systematically erased every trace of the Johnson name. Edward sat down, eyes fixed on Jessica. Edward. The question is, what do you want to do with this truth? Meanwhile, back at the cafe, Christopher was living a nightmare. 2 corporate executives from HQ had arrived unannounced. They requested hiring records, complaint files, security footage. Executive number 1, just a routine audit, he said coldly. Christopher knew damn well it wasn't. Frantically searching the file cabinet, he came across a dusty folder marked Johnson. Inside, black and white photos of the original cafe with a proud black family standing at the entrance. His phone rang. He answered quickly, trying to sound composed. Christopher. Christopher Reed speaking. The voice on the other end was cool, professional, and deadly serious. Caller OS. This is the legal counsel for Thornton Hospitality Group. We are officially filing a lawsuit regarding the property currently known as Reed Coffee House, formerly the Johnson Family Cafe. Christopher went pale. He hung up, heart racing, and called his father, Richard Reed, regional vice president of the company. Christopher on phone. Dad, we've got a serious problem. It's about the cafe, about the Johnsons. A long silence. Then Richard's voice, sharp, controlled, ice-cold. Richard. Who found out a waitress? Jessica Johnson. Silence again. How much does she know? Almost everything, and she's backed by Edward Thornton. A series of heavy breaths was the only answer. Get to my office. Now. 3 hours later, Jessica returned to the cafe, this time with Edward Thornton, a team of lawyers, and a discreet filming crew in tow. The regulars looked up, curiosity piqued as the group entered and settled at the center table. Christopher stepped out from the office, face pale. Standing beside him, his father, Richard Reed, older, broader, and bearing the same arrogant eyes. Mr. Thornton. Richard forced a smile. To what do we owe the pleasure? Edward said nothing. He simply nodded toward Jessica. She rose, calm eyes scanning the room, her voice firm. I'd like to share something. With you, and with everyone here. She gestured. The lights dimmed. A projector lit up the wall. The first image appeared: Johnson Family Cafe. 1932, a proud family standing in front of the storefront sign, clear as day. This cafe was built by Thomas Johnson, my great-great-grandfather. It was the first cafe in town to serve both white and black customers, a radical act at the time. The slideshow continued: forged documents, letters, falsified contracts made while Thomas was hospitalized with pneumonia. When my ancestor fell ill, Harold Reed, your grandfather, forged the paperwork to seize this cafe. It was never sold. It was stolen. Murmurs broke out across the room. Zoe and the cafe staff exchanged shocked glances. Richard made a move forward, but Christopher stopped him because the next slide was damning. An email from Christopher sent to the parent company 2 years ago. I've come across some old ownership documents. Could be legal trouble if the Johnsons are involved. Recommendation: destroy and deny if anyone asks. Dead silence. Christopher stared at Jessica, jaw slack. How did you get that? Jessica didn't flinch. Apparently someone in the IT department kept a backup. Richard tried to regain composure. These accusations are baseless. Documents can be forged. Stories can be made up. Edward Thornton stood, his voice sharp as a blade. That's why we brought witnesses. The front doors burst open. 3 news stations rushed in, cameras rolling, followed by a group of reporters. And most shocking of all, the CEO of Reed Hospitality Group walked in behind them. Mr. Reed, he said, coldly, we have a serious heritage issue on our hands. Richard's face flushed red. John, we can handle this internally. It's too late, the CEO cut him off. Turning to the cameras, he declared, as CEO of Reed Hospitality Group, I am deeply disturbed by this evidence. We will launch a full investigation and are committed to correcting any historical injustice uncovered. Christopher slumped back against the counter, voice faint. This will destroy us. Jessica looked at him, not with smugness, but with a quiet, unwavering calm. No, she whispered, just loud enough for him to hear. It's restoring something that should never have been stolen. That night, the story that shook the entire town flooded every local news channel. In a small kitchen, Jessica sat quietly watching her mother, peacefully asleep for the first time in months. A story of theft and erasure was being rewritten, not with vengeance, but with truth. Jessica understood as she reached out and turned off the TV. This is only the beginning of something much bigger than handing a $5 bill to a stranger in need. 3 months later, since the day the truth was exposed at the cafe, what once seemed like a mere property dispute had become a national symbol of restorative justice. Jessica stood in front of the now fully restored building, the old sign Johnson Family Cafe glinting under the sun, recreated from vintage photographs. The new glass door reflected her face, no longer the timid waitress, but a woman who had reclaimed both her family's legacy and its rightful place in history. Are you ready? Edward Thornton asked softly behind her. Almost can't believe it, she murmured, eyes locked on the building now belonging to the Johnson Foundation, established with the multi-million-dollar settlement Reed Hospitality Group was forced to pay. Your grandmother would be proud, Edward said. Behind them, a small crowd had gathered for the reopening ceremony, reporters, locals, and most importantly, young people from marginalized communities selected to join a free training program in hospitality hosted right there. Across town, in a much smaller cafe, Christopher Reed sat silently staring at a cheap cup of coffee. His father, Richard Reed, had resigned from the company in disgrace. Christopher had been publicly dismissed, part of the CEO's PR campaign to rebuild trust. Here you go, a young waitress set the cup in front of him. It's on the house. She smiled gently, sensing the emptiness in his eyes. Christopher looked up, stunned by the unexpected kindness, the very kind he had once denied to so many others. Sometimes the greatest lesson isn't losing what you had, but finally understanding the value of what you never appreciated. Back at Johnson Family Cafe, Jessica cut the red ribbon as camera shutters clicked wildly. Beside her, her mother, smiling through tears from her wheelchair, watched as their story came full circle. Jessica held the microphone, her voice firm and clear. This won't just be a cafe. It will be a center of opportunity and remembrance. Every cup of coffee served here will tell a story of resistance, and every customer will be welcomed with the dignity every human being deserves. Applause erupted, echoing down the street. In the crowd, Zoe beamed, now the operations director of the new cafe. That afternoon, after the crowd had dispersed, Jessica spotted Edward sitting quietly in a corner watching the first guests walk through the doors. She took a seat across from him, curiosity in her eyes. "Why did you choose to test people that way?" she asked, finally voicing the question that had lingered. Pretending to be a poor old man, Edward stared into his cup of coffee, reflective. "When you have money, Jessica, people only show you the best version of themselves. The perfect mask. I never really knew who was genuine until they believed there was nothing left to gain." "And what did you gain from all of this?" she asked softly. Edward smiled. "Hope. The confirmation that there are still people willing to do the right thing even when no one is watching." The following week, the Johnson Family Cafe opened its first exhibit, a history wall, chronicling the journey from its founding through the years it was stolen, and finally to its restoration. At the center, a blown-up photo of Thomas Johnson, Jessica's great-grandfather, standing in front of the original cafe. One clause in the settlement required Richard Reed to attend the exhibit's opening, a symbolic act of acknowledgement. He stood in the corner of the room, looking uncomfortable, occasionally recognized by passers-by. Jessica walked up to him, stood directly in front of him. "Mr. Reed." He froze. "Ms. Johnson." She looked him straight in the eyes. "Do you know why I didn't press criminal charges against your family, even though I had all the evidence?" Richard shook his head, avoiding eye contact. "Because this was never about revenge. It was about doing what's right, about the truth." She paused. "And the truth, unlike power or money, can't be stolen. It can only be hidden, for a time." 1 month later, Business Ethics magazine published a full-page article about Jessica, naming her a representative of a new generation of leadership committed to social justice. That same month, Christopher Reed, unable to find work in the industry, began working in a warehouse on the outskirts of town. "If you could go back to that day in the cafe," a reporter once asked Jessica, "would you do anything differently?" Jessica smiled. "Not at all. Every humiliating moment that day led me exactly where I needed to be." The final page of the article featured a photo of Jessica and Edward Thornton sitting side by side in the new cafe, not as boss and employee, not as benefactor and victim, but as partners in a mission for change. Below the image was a quote from Jessica: "Kindness is not weakness. It is the courage to hold onto your humanity in a world that's constantly trying to take it away. In a world that often rewards power and punishes compassion, one simple act of kindness unraveled decades of injustice." Jessica didn't just pay for a stranger's coffee, she reclaimed a legacy, rewrote history, and proved that dignity can never truly be stolen. So the next time you're faced with a choice to turn away or to act, remember this story and choose kindness. Because kindness isn't weakness. It's the most powerful legacy you can leave behind. If this story touched you, like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful true stories that remind us of the best parts of being human. We'll see you in the next one.